Good afternoon. We'll take a minute and let folks enter into the Zoom room with us. I'm Michelle Wagner with NAMI New Hampshire, and I work on the First Episode Psychosis Early Serious Mental Illness Initiative. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar titled Good Care in Trying Times, Realistic Steps to Nourish Ourselves and Our Communities. This presentation is being recorded, and you'll be able to find it on the education page of onwardnh.org. In the next couple of days, you'll receive a follow-up email with links to both an evaluation and the recording. This is a Zoom webinar. Your camera and microphone are off. The chat is working, so please enter any comments you have there. The Q&A is there as well. We can just use the chat if that works for folks. We have a wonderful panel with us today, and we're looking forward to a robust discussion. As we all know, the last 3 years have been trying times, so we're going to talk today about the losses we've experienced, the collective trauma we've been through, and then we're going to talk about our way forward, ways to nourish ourselves and our communities. So to get started, I'm going to have folks introduce themselves. Let's begin with you, Felicity.
Oh, hello, and so glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me. This is a great panel. I'm Felicity Bernard. I'm a licensed clinical mental health counselor. I do work at the University of New Hampshire at an institute called the Institute of Health Policy and Practice. And so in that work, I help pediatricians become more trauma-informed, better able to manage mental health and behavioral health stuff in their clinics. I also have a clinical role at a online therapy called DB Teens New Hampshire, DBT for you, which is really rewarding. And I'm a mother of two. Back to you, Michelle.
Great, thank you, Felicity. Liz, how about you?
Hi, I'm Liz Haynes. I work on the HOPE program at Monadnock Family Services. I work with young adults who are experiencing their first episode of psychosis and try to help them through that scary and confusing time.
Great, thank you, Liz. Samantha, how about you?
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, I'm Sam Captain. I am the peer program specialist at the Bureau of Mental Health Services in New Hampshire's Department of Health and Human Services. And part of my role is, running the Office of Consumer and Family Affairs, as well as working on peer programs, initiatives, advocacy, statewide training efforts, and yeah, all kinds of like peer-related topics and advocacy initiatives. My background is in peer support. I'm a certified peer specialist here in New Hampshire. I'm a state level intentional peer support trainer. And I'm somebody with my own lived experience that is particular to experiences of trauma.
Great, thank you, Sam. Jace.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jace Troy, and I work for NAMI New Hampshire as the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Program Assistant. Very long title, but sorry, that is my cat. But I work on everything diversity, equity, and inclusion within NAMI New Hampshire, trying to make sure that our programs are equitable and we're having conversations about diversity and inclusion as much as we possibly can. So thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for joining us. And with that, we'll have Jace take down the screen and turn it over to Felicity to set the stage for our discussion.
Felicity, you're muted.
Yes, you're muted, Felicity.
I know. I couldn't find it. I just couldn't see it. I'm here now. Thank you. And so, yeah, I'm just going to set the stage a little. I think what I'm about to talk about is not going to be a surprise to anyone, but just kind of set the stage for where we can focus our attention. And so, what we're going to do today, as Michelle mentioned, we're going to name the experience, right? Because that's the first step in healing is what is it we're experiencing? Like, just this confusion, this fog, this like, who are we now? And what does this new world look like? Then we're gonna look at the impacts, and then we're gonna share ways to heal and move forward. So the first thing I wanna talk about is the concept of collective trauma. So collective trauma is reactions to a traumatic event that affects an entire society. It does not only represent a historical fact or event, but it's collective memory of an awful event that happened to a group of people. And collective trauma has a way of just shattering the basic fabric of society, and we're still discovering the impacts today. So you see it in childcare settings. I talked to someone in a Head Start the other day, unprecedented amount of behavioral challenges in their classroom. It used to be 1 or 2 kids, now it's the entire classroom. Those kids that were born 2018, 2019, 2020 are all severely impacted by it. High school students, elderly, it keeps building, right? It's not over. Like who thinks the pandemic is over, right? We might not be as exposed to a virus, but we are still all feeling that impact. So things like, so we're just going to name them, right? Here we go. Oh, geez. Okay, so you can see my little bubbles, right? And so increasing political divisiveness and violence in the streets, distrust and violence, weather events, including devastating hurricanes, heat waves, wildfires, medical, economic, racial, and climate-based catastrophes, just highlighting the need for attention to the meaning and implications of this cumulative compounding trauma exposure. Isolation is huge. It has a severe impact on mental health and well-being. This disproportionately affects folks in the older demographic who are home alone with no supports. It's just the ambiguity, right, of this. Is it over? What is this isolation? Can we come out yet? How do we get back into the routine? How do we talk to people normally again, right? I was at a conference the other day and I thought, there's this woman I've known for 4 years, talk to her all the time. First time I've ever seen her in real life. And we just screamed and ran towards each other. There's this huge emotional burst because we were in person and seeing each other, right? So we're missing out on missing out on that human connection where you can see people on Zoom all day, but you don't get to exchange that, that humanity in the same room as each other. It's just lost. Yeah. Okay. So loneliness again is vicious. It causes increased health risks, earlier death. Internet and social media engagement exacerbate these feelings of loneliness, depression, and anxiety. And so here is where we are. Let's see what this has been doing to us. Again, I've been naming populations that have been disproportionately effective, but here are some that really stick out for us. Women having to, am I going to stay home? Am I going to work? What does this mean for my children? What does this mean for my career? All of those things. BIPOC communities, especially with the co-occurrence of all the racial, George Floyd, and all of the new focus for most of America on these disparities and diverse and inequities, economically disadvantaged children and adolescents, and those of us with pre-existing mental challenges are all at greater risk for these things. Let's take a second to talk about social media. There's a blessing and a curse, right? It can help you feel more connected. However, it has this impact of, so let me give an example. So at the Boston bombings at the marathon, right? So there was a study after that showed that folks that watched it repeatedly, they were nowhere near Boston, but they watched it repeatedly, had more impact, more symptoms of PTSD than the folks that were right there on the finish line experiencing it in real life. So it's that oversaturation of negative and trauma and watching these things repeat over and over again. I had the same experience when the two towers went down. It was just everywhere, and it's just reliving reliving that trauma. And so that social media can be super toxic, especially for our teenagers. We've seen the new Burfus data, which is surveillance data we collect from high schoolers, shows an increase in sexual violence, thoughts of suicide, depression, all of these things that our teenagers in New Hampshire are now experiencing. Oh my gosh, eating disorders have gone skyrocketed. And so in my own practice, I see a lot of eating disorders, lots of suicide ideation, and just like not feeling like they have any sort of ownership over their lives, right? This lack of immediacy or agency. And so those are the things, right? Those are a lot of things. And so I'm gonna just take down my slides for a second, and we're gonna just go around and talk about what does this look like, and how have these interfered with ourselves and our ability to provide good care for others. So personally for me, I have really felt the impact of loneliness, right? So I'm on Zoom all day. We can go into the office, right? It's just not very, not everybody goes in all the time. And so you can choose to go in or not. And I just miss that human connection, the water cooler talk, the impromptu, how was your day? How are your kids? You don't get that on Zoom. I don't. You go in, you do your business, you get out. Right? Also, my kids, right? I just have this huge guilt about letting them watch too much screen. Like, right, I got stuff to do. How am I, and they're just, and I'm trying. I try not to beat myself up a lot about it, but it really is. I'm like, I'm a bad mother. This is what I'm feeling. How can I be, good at this and good at this at the same time? So what do you guys think? How is it impacting?
I'd love to piggyback on that and talk about the loneliness, right? You had mentioned, Felicity, about older adults being impacted. So I'm the oldest one on this panel by a decade or two, and or three. And it was really hard for me. I live alone. I'm single. I live alone. We got booted out of the office. My work became virtual, staring at a screen day in and day out, and not having people to talk with. On top of that, I also made a move shortly into COVID. So now I'm in a new community, and it was unbelievably isolating, so isolating. I'm really fortunate that I work at NAMI New Hampshire. We're into social service and taking care of people, right? So my coworkers actually thought about me in the leadership team who, oh, this makes me teary, because they took care of me, because they said, when we start allowing people back into the office, we need to think about Michelle. She's home alone, right? So my coworkers showed up for me. So that was huge. So yeah, that's it for me for the moment.
And off of that, for a lot of us, our home became our workspace as well. And this space where we used to go and use to decompress and relax after a long day is now the same exact space as the ones that we may be experiencing stress in. And now it doesn't necessarily feel as much of a safe space for a lot of people. And so kind of balancing that work-life balance, but in the same space, and making sure that you're configuring that space to work for you in a way that also takes care of your mental health and your mental wellness at the same time. And a lot of people are going back to the office now, but a lot of people are still staying home and working from home at the same time. And although it can be really wonderful, it can kind of be stressful at times because that space is becoming the same place. And it's hard to kind of escape or take a step away from those stressors or those realities at some time.
Yeah, I agree with that. I know for me, working from home was really difficult, and that lack of connection, not only with my coworkers, but with my clients. I had people in real need that I could only see over the phone or over Zoom. I couldn't, go be there with them and physically support them. And that made it really hard to feel like I was doing my job well. And really worried for those clients that I couldn't see them, physically lay eyes on them and make sure that they were okay. It's a scary times.
Yeah, and I mean, I almost felt kind of the opposite, where I was working in person through the entire pandemic because I was working, on mobile crisis teams and running a residential program. There was no ability for me to do that from home. And that kind of led me to feel like a sense of jealousy, honestly, of all the people who were able to be home, because I felt really unsafe. Someone who is, high risk, I have asthma as well as like autoimmune problems, and to be still going out in the community face to face with so much uncertainty, and that lack of sense of safety really impacted me as well. I was lucky in some ways, right? Because I had those people around me more regularly, but it came with a cost. It came with that realization that every person I was in contact with was increasing my risk of exposure and the possibility that I could die, or bring, the virus home and infect people I care about. I also purchased my first home like in December of like 2019, so a couple months before things shut down. And though I was able to keep, most of my income, I was a 2-job person at the time. My second source of income was gone. My husband's income was gone. He was laid off at the start of the pandemic. And we had just spent our entire life savings on a down payment, and had no reserves financially. So there was definitely like financial stress, and just like a loss of connection on a social level, because I was also worried about, bringing viruses to my community. Because I was working in person, I was trying to limit the people I was in contact with so I wouldn't have the risk of infecting them. But yeah, I think that sense of like lack of safety, a lack of control, and really also like I was very deeply impacted by a lack of that sense of justice, with everything that was happening like in our communities around us, and on the news every day.
That makes me think about my social circles. So I was cut off from my work social circle, but within my friend circle too, I have my dearest and closest friend who I spend a lot of time with also has asthma. So I was cut off from her, and even now she's still very concerned about her health. And so we have a birthday party coming up this weekend, and she may not come. If it ends up raining and she can't spend time outside, then I won't be able to see her. So my relationships have been really deeply, deeply impacted.
Yeah, another place I saw that kind of loss of community was in actual grief. I think of, the fact that I actually lost my father during COVID, and there was no funeral, right? Which is normally a place where people gather and provide a community of support for the people who are grieving. And to have like so much loss of actual life, in our faces, like all the time, as somebody who's lost a number of people over the last few years in my family, that really impacted me in like a very, compounding way.
And I experienced that as well. I lost my sister and we lost a family friend in 2021. And it was just a very different feeling around it. I've lost people prior to the 2020s, and there was some normalcy around getting together and celebrations of life. And so, when we're naming losses, even losing people during this time, even if it wasn't from COVID, there was still just some dramatic shifts in how we were able to grieve those folks.
Yeah, like our traditions too, right? Like not just routines, but like actual traditions.
And even loss of boundaries in some sense, because now that everyone's working remotely, it's hard to leave work at the office because the office is home. And so it's a matter of like, oh, I'll just check one more email before I go to bed, or oh, my work phone just rang and now it's a cell phone and I bring it with me everywhere I go. And I feel like before we were able to kind of set those boundaries and leave work at work. Um, but now, like, we have lost those boundaries, and trying to figure out how to implement them again so that we are taking care of ourselves is really important as well.
And I would just like to mention people who weren't or haven't been working right outside of the home, perhaps, or have jobs that they needed to go to. Like one of my sons was not employed during the pandemic, and that was extra isolating for him. So he didn't even have at least a work team that he might check in via email, right? He was really disconnected from people. Wondering, Felicity, if you want to bring that poll up at this point in time, you let me know when you want to do that.
Yep, I think that's a great idea right now. So we want to hear from you. How have you been impacted? So we have a little poll if you want to take part in it. And if there's something other that you'd like to share with us, please put it in chat. Because this is this is a cathartic part of our webinar. You get to say, this is how it's impacted me, right? To be heard. Let's do that, right? Okay, so go ahead, Michelle. Launch the poll and then feel free to fill in the chat as well. What area of life has been most trying for you in these last several years? Adapting to the virtual world, navigating and maintaining relationships, community connection, health outcomes, other. And again, if you want to put the other in the chat, that would be great. We'll give folks a minute to answer that.
I think what we found when we were prepping for this webinar is just how the feelings and the thoughts and what we were going through, we could feel sort of alone with it. And what we realized is it's really normal that other people are feeling the same thing. So it'd be great to hear from people what's been going on with them.
Oh yeah, I think I've, long since let go of the concept of normal, right? Because if abnormal is normal, like what does that all mean, right? And I really haven't met people who haven't been struggling. Like it's visible everywhere, and with every person who I'm engaging, like in truthful dialogue, it's there. I think there's a real power in actually naming that as a community.
And are folks seeing those results?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It looks like maintaining relationships and community connections are tied for first. Yeah, absolutely. Anyone sharing anything in the chat? The politics of the pandemic were challenging. Families had different views around vaccines. Oh, yes, this political divide, right? What is truth? What is science? What is facts? What is made up, right? The distrust in the public health system, right? Distrust in science.
Yeah, I'm really glad somebody mentioned that. My husband and I were married, pre-pandemic, but only mildly. My husband likes to say we were married 2 weeks after Trump, or 2 weeks before, rather, Trump was elected. And we were on different sides of the political and many other spectrums there. And so it was really challenging to find a way forward where we were focused on the relationship, and rather than, asking the other person to like change their mind, we ended up finding it was much more successful to like find, understanding of each other. Like, where did we form the beliefs that we have? Like what experiences did those come from? And by focusing on, understanding rather than agreement, it really helped us in terms of, continuing and maintaining that relationship over time.
we have someone else sharing that their adult children seem to enjoy it staying at home. So it does depend, right? Some people love that. Some people do not thrive. Oh, someone else lost their mom. So sorry. Severe allergies caught this March from hubby, COVID, still having inflammation of lungs, continue to exercise and pray for our community and world. Someone else worked on a 24/7 residential facility. God bless you. So I was not really impacted. My husband struggled for having to work at home for 18 months. Okay. So yeah, it's a great point. Like, I experience things differently than anyone else experiences, right? We all have our reactions to it.
And I think those are going to be unique to each of us based on, you know, our experiences prior, right? Prior to the pandemic, those things actually really impacted me, right? Like, I already had a lot of grief that I was working through. I already had a lot of trauma that I was working through. So in many senses, that stuff was brought up yet again every day, right? And like someone mentioned, you know, working in those 24/7 residential programs, you did not have time to process what was going on around you. It was more a bury your head in the work and just get through it kind of moment.
Yeah, we had two folks in the chat talk about that, Sam. Working mobile crisis was very hard. You know, feeling that jealousy, other people get to stay home. Very hard to get it into work. And then someone else says, being one of the few that worked in person while many others working from home missed coworkers. Yeah, so it's all sorts of variations of these things.
And I think Sam had made a great point when we were prepping for this, talking about collective trauma. Every person's been impacted. As we're seeing in the chat and from what was shared here on the panel, it's different for each individual, depending, because we are all individuals, right? But we've all been impacted. We've all had losses. It's been incredibly challenging and traumatizing for all of us in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
On the 603 Stories podcast that I help host, it's a podcast made by young adults for young adults. So it's always young adults that are on the podcast. And we had a COVID-19 episode on how COVID impacted the mental wellness of young adults. And it was so interesting seeing all of the varying responses to it, because some people were saying, oh, I'm a social butterfly. It really impacted me negatively because I didn't get that opportunity to socialize. But then we were getting other comments from listeners coming in saying, it was a blessing in disguise. I felt like I've been burning out for years now, and it was finally a time where I didn't feel like I had to interact socially with other people and run my social battery all the way to empty every single day. And so it is interesting how we are all experiencing this collective trauma in different ways. And although it is definitely a collective trauma, some people have been finding more silver linings than other people. And not that it's had benefits necessarily, because I feel like benefits is a strong word to use in this sense, but silver linings for sure. And people have found different ways to cope and manage this experience that we're going through and really do what's best for them in the course of it all.
And Kim Murdoch, our communications director, did share the link to that podcast that's in the chat for folks.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned kind of the impacts in both directions. And I kind of found that was true within myself, like in both directions, right? You know, much like somebody had mentioned, you know, I had to slow down. I was forced to slow down because my second job was a wedding photographer. And there were no weddings, but I had 15 years of working every weekend during the summer, right? I had 15 years of 7 days a week work during the summer because I was also maintaining regular employment. And to have those weekends, right, was actually really wonderful. And I needed to be forced to stop the work that I was doing to realize how much I needed that space and how much it really benefited me, and just like the impact of having that once again in my life.
I love how you said, Jace, like the social butterflies versus the folks who just want to stay at home, right? That was great. I got to stay at home. And now we see that integration back into like having to go to school every day is a big challenge for those folks. And Liz, if you want to tell about the folks that were already agoraphobic, you want to tell that one? I thought that was very powerful.
Sure. So I've been working with this client for about 2 years, and she self-identifies as agoraphobic. So we've only met ever on the phone. We had one Zoom meeting once, and with the eventual goal of meeting in person. So recently she had to be reassigned to a different case manager as my caseload is shifting. And when I told her that, I asked if she wanted to meet over the phone or over Zoom, and she actually invited us to her house. So first time I've ever met her was for her to meet her new case manager. And I was just so immensely proud of her for taking that huge step to meet somebody, have somebody come into her space after years of it just being an impossible goal to her.
Yeah. Great sharing in the chat too.
And what's so
Yeah, so
fascinating now?
reemerging.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
What's so fascinating now is that we never really considered all of these other options for remote work for people who may not have the same social experiences as some of us outgoing people. But now that the pandemic has happened and we were kind of forced to accept that type of work, um, I've noticed a lot of places that are continuing to remain hybrid to provide that sense of comfort level for anyone going forward. So yeah, you can work in person if that's what's most effective for you, but you can also work from home if that's what's most effective for you. And it's not always a matter of, oh, I need to work from home because I might be more at risk for COVID or something like that. It's no longer just a need, but it's a matter of being flexible so that everyone is able to reach their highest potential in an environment that suits them, which I've really appreciated.
And Sam, I don't know if you saw Polly's comment, but that my supervisors and colleagues had no patience or compassion for support, right? We're talking about that too, like providing that space, right, in our workplaces, to be able to feel that human, right? And we can't just shut it down and pretend it's not there. It's very invalidating.
I saw that too. And I appreciate like that comment, because I think, that's part of, how I find solutions to this. It is allowing more kind of vulnerability. And I was a supervisor of mobile crisis peers during the pandemic. And I found what made it survivable for both me and my team in many cases was the freedom to actually talk about more than just work at work. Like in our supervision practice, people were welcome to bring whatever it was that they needed support with, whether it was work related or not, because we are like actual whole humans, right? And there is very limited ability for most of us to just shut down that part of ourselves that is, broken or devastated or struggling. When we walk through our work doors, right? Like that doesn't stop being present in our lives. So the ability to really be our full selves and be vulnerable and have that struggle be not only allowed in the workplace, but supported within it. Like, can we create room for us to be whole humans in our work? I think yes, and I think we need to. That we not only need to start being vulnerable and talking about these things in our work, but that we need to be more open to receiving it, even when it's deeply uncomfortable, so that people aren't in that discomfort alone.
Right. Oh my gosh, this is great sharing. I feel so validated. So shall we move on to now what? Now that we've felt our feelings, we get them out there. Now what do we do? So let me share some of this. That's the answer. Connection. Connections are our way out. There's so much research that shows that connection is healing. It's it can change, you know, from it can elevate mood and pull people out of isolation, right? It's just so powerful. And so it just reminds me of, I don't know if anyone's read this book. It's The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk. I'm huge into trauma-informed care and being aware of trauma and being able to help people through it. So in this book, Bessel van der Kolk mentions several fundamental human truths that help heal trauma. He explains that human connection is one of the greatest tools for healing. Our capacity to destroy one another is matched by our capacity to heal one another. Restoring relationships and community is central to restoring well-being. He goes on to say, language gives us the power to change ourselves and others by communicating our experiences, like we were just doing, helping us to define what we know and find a common sense of meaning, right? So the goal here is to find meaning and purpose and connection in life. And so how do we do that? When we have our own individual mental and emotional health to attend to, it can be even more challenging. So those of us with anxiety already present know that it can spread to others. My anxiety spreads to my kids, spreads to on and on and on, right? And so the opposite is also true, that when we process and acknowledge our grief and stress, we can manage our own reactions and set examples for others. So that is hopeful. What else here? Yeah, okay. Sorry. So healing and moving forward. We can't go backwards. We can't undo. So how do we move forward? So allow groups to redefine who they are and where they are going, right? There's a whole new look at how we work, how we educate, how we connect. What again, silver linings, reaching out for help. A huge barrier to that is stigma. I think we all know that, right? So having this part of our daily conversations, like Sam was saying, like it's a workplace issue. It is. Like human beings come to work as human beings, not as widgets. And so talking about it, realizing that it is universal, even if people stuff it down, that's their way of doing it. It works for them. And then they can bring it home or whatever. Not everyone is like that. So we have to make that space. Stop doom scrolling. Unplug. Stop re-traumatizing and re-traumatizing and re-traumatizing. All of this bitterness and the deaths and the the folks struggling. We just keep consuming and consuming. And this is different from any other time in history, because like the last pandemic we had in the 1800s, it was very slow. Information moved very slowly, right? And it was almost done before everyone knew about it. It wasn't, when people said it was over, it wasn't really over because it was still going on other places. And so this is just like immediate, in your face. This is all of the death and destruction and all of the bad things just constantly flooding us. So turn that off and look for silver linings. So what are some silver linings? These are areas of growth, namely self-awareness, empathy, authenticity. Like, again, bring that back to what Sam was talking about. We are authentically human, and let's bring that to work, right? Stress management, loss of control. That's a huge part of folks with eating disorder who experience that restricted eating is because they want to have control over something. And there's nothing in their life they can have control over, but this I can control. So giving back that control, realizing people have agency and have what they need inside them to continue to grow. There is increased creativity and innovation. Oh my gosh, telehealth. Can we say telehealth? Amazing. Before pandemic, it was just like, oh, we can't do that. No. And then it just exploded, right? And so more access. That means more access to rural folks, more access to, unfortunately, not more access to folks who don't have the internet. But again, spread that access to help with those disparities. Restaurants have a whole new way of operating, right? Outdoor spaces. You know, you could go pick things up. I love that. I love that, just ordering something and just going and grabbing it. Again, not having to talk to anyone or socialize, I just go and grab it. And so here are some resilient responses to trauma. So what this does happen during trauma. You can increase bonding with family and community. Trauma bonding, you've been through a difficult situation with someone, you come out feeling closer to them and more connected. Redefining or increasing our sense of purpose, right? This shook everything up for us. So what are we actually standing for now? Like, what is really important in life? Because that's what comes to mind, right? When you're facing death, you're like, well, what am I doing with my life, right? How do I make more of it? Revise priorities, increasing charitable giving and volunteerism. Oh my gosh. That's one way that I felt like I had some control. I donated money. I can't get out and expose myself, but I can give money. And then increased comment to a personal mission, right? That personal sense of feeling like I'm doing something that I can be proud of and that's going to impact others. And then just, you know, creating meaning. Like, what does this mean for us, right? So redefining, it's a start to, you know, it's like, it's terrible, right? It's not good. It's a Control-Alt-Delete though, right? It's like, okay, wipe that clean and let's pull up something that's more meaningful to us. And so with that, let's share about how we do this. Yeah. I love, okay, so I'm Catholic, don't hold it against me. I know it's like a touchy subject sometimes. You talk about religion. I leave the policies, leave or take whatever I need to, but the feeling of connectedness inside that church is what brings me there. Singing together with with a room full of other people just brings me to a place like it fills me with joy, right? Like singing, if I could find some other ways to do it, I might do that. But that connected to my past and the connection to those around me, that voice is so powerful. How about you, Sam? What do you do?
Well, I mean, I kind of feel like I had an advantage in this because I had experienced trauma previously and had found ways, you know, to incorporate those experiences in who I was in the present and in meaningful ways. So I often think about the fact that like a crisis can be a significant opportunity. And I really relate that to like the metaphor of a wildfire, how like in wildfire in nature, sometimes that devastation and destruction is actually necessary to provide like the space for new growth. And for that growth to exist, there has to be that space, right? There has to be an absence of something in order for us to like revise what's there. And in some cases, like even nourish the new growth, right? And so for me, I think about that a lot every time I'm in a state of crisis, whether it's related to this pandemic or not, that this can be an opportunity for me to find a new way forward. And I try as much as possible to not be afraid of that prospect, right? Like change is really hard for many of us, myself included. And sometimes I feel really afraid of that. But then I remind myself of all the ways that I already have changed and the ways in which those changes have really served me well. To have that like space for reflection and realignment, right? Like to revise and redefine ourselves, to reinvent like who we are. Those are all like opportunities that come out of a state of crisis. And for me, like, I mean, I find a lot of discomfort in silence and solitude. But I've been kind of practicing that more in kind of smaller chunks. And so for me, the silver lining was, again, those weekends, right? Those weekends where I got to sit on my deck and birdwatch. Yeah, that was important to me. I got to find beauty in the present moment. And I learned like really the value of putting myself in the path of those beautiful things. And I don't know, Felicity, do you want to show some of my birds?
I do.
I did professional photography for like a number of years, but I'm instead now focusing like really on nature, and finding really the beauty that's all around me, like all the time. By taking, pictures and like picking up my camera and focusing it on the natural world, I was able to remind myself of like the natural process of like growth and revision and just beauty, even in like destruction and chaos. Thanks, Felicity, for showing those. Yeah. It's healing for me to focus on that stuff.
Yes, nature. It's so healing. Right?
It is. And also like just like our relationships, right? Like if anything, causing us to like look at those relationships and really place a bigger value on those genuine connections, on like the embrace of someone who loves you, right? Like that's a silver lining for me, that we are all more aware of those impacts.
I really
Yes, Sam.
like what you said about clearing the way for new growth. And the pandemic was definitely an opportunity for me to do that as well. I am a trans man. I was born female and I am a man. So I began my medical transition just before the start of the pandemic. I had top surgery on February 19th, 2020. So right before the world shut down. And I was grateful for the pandemic in a sense, because it gave me the opportunity to transition in peace and really kind of grow into this new version of myself. And the pandemic just kind of acted as like a little cocoon for me to do that. I went in as the caterpillar, cocooned for a little while, and came out this whole new person. And I think that in that sense, the pandemic was really good for my mental health, because I didn't feel the social pressure, the social stigma as much as I probably could have. And that was a real blessing for me, because it gave me the time to kind of reflect and go about my journey at my own rate and in my own way, and really come out stronger on the other side because of it.
Oh, Jace, I'm so glad that you mentioned the butterfly and that transformation. It's something I've been thinking about a whole lot, because, yeah, I mean, change is messy. Like, I don't know if you know what happens inside an actual chrysalis.
Oh yes.
Uh,
Lagoon.
like for those of you who don't, it's literally a melting down of what was into liquid, like a goopy mixture. And what comes out of that process, where that inside that chrysalis is very few parts of that caterpillar are actually contained in their original form in the butterfly. But I think of that butterfly, about what its function is in the world, like to go around and in this space of darkness, like transform in the chrysalis, right? But then to come out and to literally be pollinating plants, and to just like spark awe and wonder. Like, how many times have you seen a butterfly and just like a smile spread across your face as you watch it like float through the air and like just do its thing? It just like makes me joyful every time I see that. It's like an awe and wonder thing. And there's this Maya Angelou quote about that, which is like, we delight in the beauty of the butterfly, but rarely admit the changes it's gone through to achieve that beauty. Like, why is it we aren't reflecting on the process as much as we are the product?
And many days I was a pile of goo, it seemed. Emotionally. And yeah, sometimes you have to do that in order to be the best version of yourself.
yeah, and to spread beauty in the world, right? Like to provide that sense of wonder for other people and possibility.
In the last 3 years, we've all been our own pile of goo in some form or another, right? And for me, when I think about connection and getting back to trying to heal from all of this, there's been trauma, and how are we healing from it? And for me, living alone, working from home much of the time, it was getting reconnected with my community. And one facet of community for me is a recovery community. I'm a woman in recovery. I have an eating disorder that Felicity mentioned a couple of times. I have that, but I also have substance use. I identify as having alcoholism. So I do 12-step work. And it was so hard to meet people over Zoom. Now we're back in person. So if connection is the key to all of this, figuring out ways for me to reconnect with people. And for me in particular, I know social media and texting and phone calls work for people. For me, actually being face to face with people is really fabulous. And that dear friend who has asthma, I do get to see her on Saturdays. We're like two little old ladies every noontime on a Saturday. We're sitting at the same restaurant, getting pretty much the same food. And that has been precious and fabulous, just to reconnect to the world in that way.
That a great point about recovery too. I mean, they've done studies on this, right? The rats in the environment, right? And they found that they like sum it up by saying sobriety is not the opposite of addiction. It's connection. Connection is the opposite of addiction. And so how do we recover? We do it together. Yeah. Yeah. How about you, Liz? Anything?
For me, the biggest connection I had throughout the pandemic was my clients and my teammates. Being able to support my clients in their darkest moments and to celebrate their little victories every day, even if I couldn't see them in person, was amazing. And when I fell flat on my face and felt like the world was ending, my team was always here to pick me back up. No judgment, just always encouragement and support. And yeah, I don't know how I would have gotten through the pandemic without being in the position I am in now. Very grateful.
Liz, I actually think you make a really good point of the impact of caring for others on ourselves. Like for a very long time, even pre-pandemic, I've had service to others on my self-care list because I've seen, so many times where being there for someone else and providing someone else the space for healing and connection and meaning, right, in the struggle, like that's healing for me. To realize that like I have some value in the world. Sometimes I forget that, right? Like sometimes you feel like a cog in a machine or that you're a failure. I know I do all the time, regardless of the evidence. I feel that. And so feeling that what I'm doing in my connections matters. Yeah, that I matter to other people, that I can help someone else.
That's a great, pardon me, sir. Great segue into the On Being episode that Sam had shared with us. Krista Tippett interviewed the Surgeon General, and I put the link in the chat because that could help you all expand this conversation that we've had today. Do we want to do our final poll, Felicity?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. Let me make sure that I can get to that. This is my first experience doing polls. Here we go. Let me launch the last one. Good care.
So after hearing today's discussion, what do you think you're going to do differently? How are you going to nourish yourself and your community? And again, chat is also available. Share your ideas with us. How can we learn from you? So here's a short list of things. Prioritize self-care, find ways to engage more in my community, put more energy into my relationships with friends and family, recognize and appreciate the value I get from work and volunteering, or something else? What do you think?
Reconnect and pick up new hobbies. Eat more chocolate.
Eat more
I like that one.
Comes to my
Here,
office,
here.
feel it.
I'm gonna.
Do you know
end
that
our
you get
call.
the same brain activity eating chocolate that you do when someone gives you a compliment? So if you want to give someone a piece of chocolate, give them a
Oh, and hopefully those results are showing for you.
Yeah, they're showing on my end.
Okay, great.
yeah.
Liz, Michelle keeps chocolate in her office too, and I often sneak in to grab one.
That I do.
You got to know where the stashes are, don't you? Yeah.
That's
True.
right. That is key.
I
That
made
is
the
key.
mistake of letting her know I had candy in here, so she comes by a few times a week to grab some.
There you go.
Oh,
Yeah, if you
So-
like people come visiting your office, just keep some chocolate there. You'll be visited frequently.
I actually found that was a really good skill in hospital settings too. Like if you're in inpatient hospital, like having surgery or there for a health issue, if you put candy in your room, the nurses come in more.
that is super wise. We are getting to the end of our time together. Sam, I know you had a poem you wanted to share with us.
Yeah, a dear friend of mine wrote this poem. It's titled Resilience, and it's written by Karen Privé. And I just really appreciate her perspective on this. The poem goes, "Be resilient," they told me, but resilience rarely refers to the ability to bounce back into who I was before. Can I change to meet this new situation? Can I change to adapt to these circumstances? Can I change my ways to overcome? Can I change? Please, can I change? A prayer, a plea to the universe for courage and willingness to become a revised version of me. Trembling, I stretch to meet her. Like a dandelion breaking through the crack in the sidewalk, resilience is birthing a beautiful new self in whatever conditions we find ourselves. And I just really appreciate Karen's words there as a reminder that resilience isn't always about bouncing back, but finding our new selves, that reinvention and the permission that we need to just like revise for the moment we're in.
Thank you, Sam. Take away from you, Liz. What words of wisdom as we part company today?
I don't know. Come back to me.
I'm coming back to you, Jace. How about you?
The freedom to live authentically and creatively can give way to progress and hope, I guess, be my takeaway.
Nice, thank you. And for me, it's connect, reconnect, connect with the people that are already closest to you, deepen that in some way. But think about connecting with the people around you. Liz, can we hit you up now?
I mean, yeah, really connecting, deepening connections with my coworkers, with my friends, with my clients. Really is important.
Beautiful. Thank you, Liz. Felicity, we're going to end with you.
Did you get to go? Yeah,
She
okay.
did.
Okay. Yeah, okay. My biggest takeaways are, I mean, from hearing from you guys and all of this great conversation is that the first thing we have to do is recognize it and talk about it, right? It's not a shame. There's no shame involved here. Like we're all humans and we're all doing this together, right? And so to keep the stigma going with all of this mental health, like, ooh, we don't talk about that. We have to stop that. We have to be able to let people access the help that they need. I also, connection obviously is huge. And just being able to talk about these things, right, is just so powerful for me, to name it, all right, and then come together and say, hey, what can we do together? I think all of that is just super powerful. How do you do that in your family? How do you do that in your community, right? And so having these conversations and having the conversations about how we heal too can be very powerful.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you all so very much for this panel today. Just a reminder, a recording of today's discussion will be posted on the education page of onwardnh.org. You will receive an email in the next couple of days with links for the website along with the evaluation link. Once you've completed the survey, you'll receive a certificate of attendance automatically. Any questions, please reach out to me. And next Wednesday, May 3rd, we'll be talking with Todd Donovan and his experience with tardive dyskinesia. Hope to see you then. Thank you all so much.